we talked to homeowners in this Okeechobee County community, and they say the flooding is just terrible. One gentleman tells me he's been fighting for 4 years, and look, he's still not getting any help.
NASA's Landsat 9 captured something in December 2024 that made scientists across Florida go silent. Dark patches were spreading across Lake Okeechobee's surface. Not algae, not normal sediment, something else entirely. And it was moving. These dark masses flowed across 730 square miles of water, following current patterns toward both coasts at 2 billion gallons per day. Within weeks, the turquoise waters near Sanibel Island turned black. Rivers emptying into the Atlantic did the same. The contamination wasn't coming from a chemical spill. It wasn't coming from a factory discharge. It was coming from the lake floor itself, from something that had been hiding down there for 70 years. When Florida officials lowered Lake Okeechobee by 4 feet to help vegetation recover, they expected to see the lake bottom heal. Instead, the footage revealed something disturbing that changed everything scientists thought they knew about this lake. The dark water hemorrhaging toward both coasts carried the physical evidence of 7 decades of buried pollution.
Open water of the lake is just past that vegetation line, that green line. This is our remaining water supply, and it needs to be clean enough to drink, and it can support wildlife.
Legacy mud, toxic ooze that had been accumulating since the 1950s. And once it started moving, nothing could stop it. This lake supplies drinking water to 8 million people. $40 billion in agriculture depends on it. And its floor is lined with poison that just entered Florida's waterways. Here's the thing about Lake Okeechobee that makes this disaster fundamentally different from any other water contamination event in American history. The lake transformed into a toxic reservoir over 7 decades, and almost nobody noticed it happening. Before the 1970s, this was actually a healthy ecosystem. Clear water, extensive beds of submerged vegetation covering more than 50,000 acres. Fish populations thrived. Drinking water required minimal treatment. Then agricultural intensification destroyed it. Massive dairy farms spread across the watershed. Sugarcane fields expanded in every direction. Fertilizer, runoff carrying phosphorus and nitrogen poured into the lake year after year. Nutrient loading increased by 500%. The ecosystem collapsed in slow motion. The first toxic algae blooms appeared in the mid-1980s. By the 2000s, vegetation coverage had crashed from 50,000 acres to less than 10,000, an 80% loss. Microcystin toxins showed up in water supplies. The lake entered chronic degradation. But here's the thing, the phosphorus wasn't just causing algae blooms on the surface. It was also settling, sinking to the bottom, mixing with dead algae, decomposed vegetation, and agricultural chemicals, building up layer after layer, decade after decade. And get this, that sediment didn't stay solid. The texture became what scientists call thixotropic. That's a technical term for something that acts like a solid when still, but turns to liquid when disturbed. Think quicksand, except this quicksand is saturated with 7 decades of accumulated toxins. A 2025 report from Florida Gulf Coast University described what's actually sitting at the bottom of Lake Okeechobee. They called it an unconsolidated flock layer, consisting of thixotropic fluid-like organic mud that is easy to resuspend and transport with little energy. The lake floor is lined with toxic ooze, and all it takes to turn that ooze into a flowing contamination event is a little bit of water movement. Lake Okeechobee spans 730 square miles with an average depth of just 9 feet. Extremely shallow for a lake this massive. It holds nearly 1 trillion gallons of water, surrounded by the Herbert Hoover Dike, 143 miles of earthen levee built after the catastrophic 1928 hurricane that killed more than 2,500 people. The dike reinforcement was completed in January 2023 at a cost of $1.5 billion. 8 million people depend on this system for drinking water. $40 billion in annual agricultural production depends on it for irrigation. Everything about South Florida's water supply connects back to this single, shallow, contaminated basin. If this is the first you're hearing about what's really sitting at the bottom of Florida's largest lake, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button. Because what the Army Corps did next made everything worse. The Army Corps of Engineers manages Lake Okeechobee's water levels within a carefully calibrated range. The target zone sits between 12.5 and 15.5 feet above sea level. Too high creates flood risk during hurricanes. Too low threatens water supply for millions of people. From 2020 to 2024, the system faced unprecedented stress. Multiple years of above-average rainfall combined with hurricanes to push lake levels above 15 feet for extended periods. High water blocked sunlight from reaching the lake bottom. Submerged vegetation couldn't germinate or grow. By summer 2024, vegetation coverage had crashed to the lowest levels ever recorded. Colonel Brandon Bowman, Army Corps Commander for Florida, announced the solution in November 2024. His stated rationale was straightforward. Lowering water levels allows light to penetrate to the bottom and allows submerged aquatic vegetation to regerminate and regrow. Lower the lake by 4 feet before the 2025 hurricane season. Let sunlight reach the bottom. Let vegetation recover. On December 7, 2024, Colonel Bowman's plan went into action. Both major water control structures activated simultaneously. Structure 77 at Moore Haven released water west into the Caloosahatchee River. Structure 308 at Port Mayaca released water east into the St. Lucie River. Combined discharge exceeded 2 billion gallons per day. Nobody saw this coming. Water managers expected clear or slightly turbid water. They expected gradual improvement over 3 months. They expected the lake to heal. Within days, reports flooded in from downstream communities. The water emerging from the spillways wasn't clear. It wasn't even normally turbid. It was dark, brown to black, opaque, loaded with suspended material that nobody had predicted. Tom Bales, an environmental reporter covering the discharge, described what he saw from the coast. The turquoise waters at the mouth of the Caloosahatchee River near Sanibel Island had turned dark. Not the greenish color of algae blooms, not tea-stained tannins, something else entirely. The initial assumption was standard turbidity from increased flow. That explanation collapsed within weeks. Turbidity kept rising. Water quality samples showed dissolved nutrients at levels far exceeding predictions. Phosphorus concentrations ran 3 to 5 times higher than the lake average. This wasn't sediment being stirred up near the outlets. This was something being transported from deep within the lake itself. Satellite imagery confirmed the nightmare scenario. Those dark patches spreading across the lake surface weren't stationary. They were moving, flowing, following current patterns toward both spillways, like rivers within the lake. Here's the catch. The problem wasn't the spillways. The problem was the lake level drop itself. Dr. Carl Havens, director of Florida Sea Grant, explained the mechanism. When you lower lake levels rapidly, you create horizontal currents across the lake bottom. Those currents interact with the legacy mud layer. The mud is thixotropic. It becomes fluid when disturbed. It gets entrained in the water column and transported out of the lake. When Okeechobee dropped 4 feet, water depth over the legacy mud went from 9 feet to 5 feet. That 44% reduction in depth meant current velocity at the lake bottom increased dramatically. Not because of the spillways, because of in-lake circulation patterns responding to shallower water. The legacy mud started flowing. Decades of accumulated phosphorus, nitrogen, pesticides, and decomposed organic material liquefied and entered the water column. Currents carried it toward the outlets. The outlets carried it into rivers. The rivers carried it toward both coasts. Millions of cubic meters of legacy mud mobilized. Sediment pollution that had accumulated over 70 years entered Florida's waterways simultaneously. The lake bed was hemorrhaging. This is where it gets worse. January 2025 brought escalation nobody was prepared for. Turbidity in downstream rivers hit the highest levels recorded in 20 years. Fish kills appeared along both coasts. Water quality advisories went out to communities from Stewart to Fort Myers. Authorities told residents not to swim, not to fish, not to let their pets near the water. February saw toxic algae blooms forming in the contaminated rivers. High nutrient loads in the discharged water fueled explosive cyanobacteria growth. Microcystin toxins showed up in downstream water supplies. Oyster beds that had survived decades of coastal development started dying. Seagrass meadows that fed manatee populations began suffocating under the turbidity. Gil Smart, journalist tracking Lake Okeechobee issues for years, had called it back in December. His assessment was blunt. This is going to make a bad situation worse. 2 billion gallons per day for 3 months equals 180 billion gallons total. Every one of those gallons carried mobilized legacy mud, phosphorus that had been piling up since the Eisenhower administration, nitrogen from fertilizers applied when Kennedy was president, pesticides that hadn't been legal to use for decades. In March 2025, the Army Corps announced the end of discharge operations. Lake level had dropped to target. Vegetation conditions showed improvement. Mission accomplished on paper. But downstream systems were contaminated with 3 months of accumulated sediment discharge, and the real consequences had just begun. The moment it became clear what had happened, theories proliferated about how to prevent it from happening again. Officials, scientists, and water managers proposed solution after solution. Every single one collapsed. Theory 1, slow the discharge. If high velocity mobilizes sediments, reduce velocity. Cut spillway discharge in half. Extend the timeline from 3 months to 6 months. Gentler flow should minimize disturbance. The hydraulic principle is sound. Halving velocity reduces sediment carrying capacity dramatically. But the problem isn't the discharge. The problem is the lake level drop itself. When the lake drops 4 feet, current velocity at the bottom increases regardless of what the spillways are doing. In-lake circulation drives the mobilization, not the outlets. Slowing discharge only extends contamination duration. Instead of 3 months of poison, you get 6 months. You double the total damage delivered downstream. Theory 2, dredge the mud. If legacy mud is the problem, remove it. Engineering assessments killed this immediately. 200 square miles require dredging. 50 to 100 million cubic yards of material must come out. Cost runs between $500 million and $2 billion. Timeline stretches 5 to 10 years. And get this, even if someone found the money, there's nowhere on Earth to put 100 million cubic yards of contaminated mud. Worse, dredging itself mobilizes sediments. Operating dredges would create massive sediment plumes throughout the lake. Turbidity would kill remaining vegetation during operations. You'd have to destroy the ecosystem for a decade to remove sediment that accumulated over 7 decades. Theory 3, stop pollution at the source. Reduce phosphorus entering the lake, and the problem eventually solves itself. Florida has been working on this since the 1990s. Stormwater treatment areas filter agricultural runoff. Best management practices went on to farms across the watershed. Real progress happened. Phosphorus inflow dropped from 500 metric tons per year to 200. But the lake needs inflow below 140 metric tons to stop accumulating. And here's the thing, the legacy mud already contains decades of accumulated phosphorus. That phosphorus is now mobilized and entering waterways. Treatment plants reduce future inflow. They cannot remove phosphorus already stored in sediments. Every time lake levels drop for management, legacy phosphorus hemorrhages downstream. Theory 4, redirect water south. Instead of releasing east and west to coastal estuaries, send water to the Everglades. Treatment areas can filter nutrients. The Everglades needs fresh water anyway. Beneficial use instead of harmful discharge. Infrastructure reality crushed this. Current capacity to send water south is 1,700 cubic feet per second. Lake releases during December to March hit 6,000 cubic feet per second. Not enough capacity exists. Treatment areas have maximum loading rates. Too much water overwhelms them. Overflow bypasses treatment and flows partially filtered into the Everglades. And the Everglades ecosystem is adapted to slow sheet flow. High-volume canal releases create unnatural patterns that damage Everglades ecology. Everglades restoration projects are underway to increase southern capacity. Estimated completion, the 2030s. Until then, no alternative exists for high-volume releases except coastal discharges. Every intervention created new pathways for contamination. Every solution generated new problems. Hydraulic whack-a-mole with billions of gallons of toxic water. Here's what nobody wants to say out loud. Lake Okeechobee cannot be fixed. Not in any meaningful time frame. Not in our lifetimes. Not in our children's lifetimes. For 70 years, Florida's agricultural industry used this lake as a dumping ground. Phosphorus-rich fertilizer, runoff from dairy farms and sugarcane fields poured in year after year. The phosphorus didn't disappear. It didn't break down. It settled into sediments. It accumulated. It built a reservoir of pollution at the lake bottom, measuring up to 80 centimeters thick at the lake's center. The legacy mud layer isn't an unfortunate side effect. It's the physical manifestation of decades of agricultural policy that prioritized production over water quality. It represents an environmental debt that was never paid. Now, every time lake management requires lowering water levels, Florida pays interest on that debt. Every release mobilizes sediments. Every mobilization exports pollution downstream. Every export destroys something: a fishery, an estuary, a community's water supply. And the debt is permanent. Even if all phosphorus inflow stopped today, the legacy mud remains for decades to centuries. The pollution is now inherent to the system. Lake levels must be managed. Too high creates flood risk. Too low causes water supply failure. Any significant level change mobilizes sediments. There is no safe way to lower Lake Okeechobee without disturbing legacy mud. The consequences are already cascading through every dependent system. Recurring toxic algae blooms plague coastal rivers during every release. Period. Oyster populations are collapsing. Fish kills have become regular events. Seagrass meadows are dying from turbidity. Manatees are losing food sources. Economic losses to fishing and tourism are reaching hundreds of millions annually. Consider Maria Santos, who runs a charter fishing boat out of Stewart. Her family has worked these waters for 3 generations. Last spring, she had to cancel bookings for 6 straight weeks because water quality advisories made it illegal to keep anything caught in the St. Lucie River. She watched the water turn black and wondered if her grandchildren would ever be able to work these waters at all. 8 million people who depend on this system for drinking water face escalating treatment costs. Municipal facilities in communities like Clewiston and Belle Glade need upgrades costing billions that their tax bases cannot support. Small communities are facing water quality emergencies they cannot afford to address. The $40 billion in agriculture that depends on lake water faces contamination affecting crop quality. Some farmland is becoming unviable. And here's the thing that makes this truly inescapable. Climate change is accelerating the cycle. Rainfall variability is increasing. More extreme wet years mean higher lake levels requiring emergency discharges. More extreme dry years mean lower lake levels exposing more sediment. The problem compounds rather than resolves. Every year brings more releases. Every release mobilizes more poison. If you want to know what other environmental time bombs are buried across America, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because Lake Okeechobee isn't the only body of water hiding 70 years of secrets at the bottom. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think there's any way to fix this, or is Florida's water system permanently poisoned? The satellite footage told a story that no official report captured. Those dark patches spreading across the lake's surface. That black water flowing towards Sanibel Island. That toxic soup entering rivers along both coasts. The footage revealed what had been hidden at the bottom of Florida's largest lake for 70 years. The footage from Florida lowering Lake Okeechobee didn't just show disturbed sediment, it showed the physical manifestation of 7 decades of environmental debt coming due. It showed that some pollution, once accumulated, becomes permanent. It showed that some decisions made generations ago have locked Florida into consequences that cannot be escaped. Florida's liquid heart is contaminated at its core, and there is no cure. The dark patches still move below the surface. They will move again during the next release, and the one after that, and every release for the foreseeable future. Each time, another portion of that 70-year legacy hemorrhages into waterways. Each time, something downstream dies. The question is no longer whether Lake Okeechobee can be restored. It cannot. The question now is which ecosystems Florida is willing to sacrifice, which communities will bear the burden, and how long officials keep pretending that successful metrics on paper can undo what 70 years of agricultural runoff did to this lake. The footage showed something disturbing on the lake floor, but the truly disturbing part isn't what's down there. We put it there, and now we can never take it back.